Episode number 15 of Making a Case. Most people operate out of selfishness. Let's get it. Hey, welcome back to Making the Case, man. Once again, your host, Dr. Jacob Isom, author, educator, speaker, entrepreneur, father. The list goes on and on, right? Hey, glad that you can make it back to us. For those of you that's new to making the case is where I take a topic or a question, I do research on it, and I make the case whether yay or nay, why I feel something is or is not, one way or the other. All right. So we back. All right. So topic for today's episode. Most people operate out of selfishness. All right. But before I get into my opening statement, you already know if you've been with us, we got two channel norms. One, we attack point and not people. And two, we don't do all the cussing and defamatory remarks and things of that nature. I am a professional, people. Okay. So let me get into my opening statement. Yes. Do I believe most people operate out of selfishness? I do. Okay. Now, some would say that the more selfish gender are women, right? Which maybe, right? We definitely know kids are selfish, right? I think when it comes to my own kids, I think back at how they operate. I'm like, them jokers only think about themselves. I just remember this past Father's Day with my son. I'm like, it's Father's Day. We should go see something I want to go see. He didn't care. He want to see what he want to see. So we know kids, right, are naturally selfish. But when we start talking about adults, right, we would think that adults have some kind of decorum, some type of sacrificial basis to how they kind of live their life, right? But in some cases, I think, or a lot of cases, that a lot of adults can be very selfish, right? We understand that we do a lot of things for our kids. We do a lot of things, quote unquote, in the name of Jesus or religion, right? But a lot of times, the things that we do are definitely are going to be attached to our happiness, what makes us money, and what progresses us, right? So a lot of time when we make decisions, those decisions are going to be what is best for us. Now, in one instance, you can kind of understand, okay, that well, looking out for you, which you are important. In my latest book, The Relationship Guide, which by the way, you can go to jacobisom.com and purchase. I talk about in the very first chapter how the most important relationship is the one that you have with yourself, right? So, in one instance, I can understand why people look out for the betterment of themselves, right? But it's one thing to look out for you, and it's another thing to try to get the upper hand and to try to bet somebody to try to kind of, you know, get an upper hand based on putting somebody else down, right? That's a whole nother thing, right? So when I think of looking out for yourself, I'm thinking of, okay, I want to make sure that I'm safe. I want to make sure I'm protected, I'm provided for, which means that I'm gonna have to go out and get the best job for me, for my family, for the people that depend on me, things of that nature. So looking out for yourself in that aspect, I don't think it's anything wrong with it. Like I said, I think is when you go to the depths of where you literally have to shame someone else, or kind of like how politics is right now, right? Or when we look at certain business practice, like I literally have to put my competitor down in order to get the advantage for someone to like me, right? So if I'm McDonald's, I'm making an ad talking about Burger King. Or if I'm the Democratic Party, I'm putting ads out there to disrespect or demean the Republican Party or Republican candidate, right? So that to me is selfish. That to me is not moral or sustainable practices, right? That will have you sleeping good at night, so to speak. All right. So what I did for you for this episode, I got three pieces of evidence to make my case of why I feel like most people operate out of selfishness. Now, I will say that the last piece of evidence is actually going to work as a counter argument. I've done this before, and you may seem like it's weird, but I just want to get another perspective, another side to it, because me giving my case is already biased to some degree, but really not, because it's somebody else's perspective and I'm just agreeing with it and finding it. Okay. But every now and then I'm gonna give a counter argument on one of the pieces of evidence. All right. So sit back, relax, grab your popcorn, do what you do, go to the bathroom, you can always pause though. But anyway. And we're gonna get into our first piece of evidence. Let's go. All right. So for my piece of evidence number one, I quite simply have a literal list of why people may be selfish. All right. So let's just get straight into it. This is from a platform called Your Tango. This is a new platform I never used before. And the title of it is 10 Reasons Why People Are Selfish and Only Care About Themselves. Seemed pretty straightforward. It says selfishness is emotional abuse. I don't know if I will go that far, but I mean, maybe it can be, right? All right. So let's get into the reasons why they say that people are selfish and only care about themselves. See if I agree or disagree, or whether you agree or disagree. All right. Let's get into the list. All right. Selfishness is one of the ugliest traits a person can have. I agree. If you happen to find yourself dealing with a selfish person, it's important to recognize the traits and do what you can to protect your peace and their presence, or distance yourself from their selfish behavior. Selfishness does drive me crazy. I'm not going to lie. It's one of the biggest reasons why I would say my previous relationship didn't work out. Selfishness is definitely at the top of the list. All right. Why are people selfish? It's almost impossible to have a healthy relationship with a selfish person. Self-centered people usually attach themselves to people pleasers, so they remain in control. Absolutely. Selfish individuals don't have any boundaries when it comes to taking whatever it is that you are willing to give them. But before you can figure out how to deal with selfish people, you must first understand the characteristics of a selfish person and how they got that way. Number one, they learn it during childhood. Good habits start at home. Selfish people don't just get that way overnight. They are conditioned to look out for themselves at all costs over time. Many have been raised in a toxic family environment where they were treated in the same way that they chose to treat others. Perhaps they came from a family that neglected them emotionally, or their parents showed them that spending time with them was a burden. They weren't cared for, so they have decided that they don't care either. Remember that hurt people hurt people. And I agree with this. Like, a lot of time it is like learned behavior, right? We know that most things in our lives are learned behavior, right? From fashion to the music we listen to, like, and then we take on those characteristics. So most things is social learned behavior, right? So a lot of times people do learn at a very early age, and that trauma that they can bring with them, take with them into a relationship, come from the hurt that they experienced when they was a child. So I definitely agree with that. They lack emotional intelligence, which, by the way, I do not like the word emotional intelligence. I like emotional maturity better. Take it with a grain of salt. Take it as you wish. All right. Children who don't feel love usually grow up to be adults who have a lack of empathy for others. Or it could be the other way around. Emotional intelligence is learned through action and observation. It has not been exhibited to them. Selfish people will have none. When people lack the ability to show their emotions in a healthy way, functional manner, things like feeling guilty show up in the form of dismissiveness. Rather than take accountability for their own actions, people who are selfish are quick to pass blame in order to avoid feelings and inadequacy. Yes, I agree. And this is where the whole narcissism comes from, right? So the whole idea that you just think you the top dog and you just so competent that anything that make it seem otherwise, you're gonna put the blame off of, right? So, like I said, I don't like the term emotional intelligence, but emotional maturity, being mature enough to handle your emotions in different contexts, is definitely key. Three, selfishness comes naturally. Let's face it, being selfless can be difficult. It's much easier to covet all of your niceties and gifts for yourself. Like I said, with children, right? When Christmas time comes. They don't care nothing about getting you no gift. They want what their presence. It takes time, energy, and effort to invest important to others. You have to be willing to put your needs aside in order to be a kind and generous person. Some simply find it much easier to look out for ourselves than to take a step back and do something that will serve others. Like the people who are very selfless, who are very caring and very giving, those type of people get taken advantage of a lot of times. And some turn to the other side where they just start thinking about themselves, right? Because they've just been traumatized and hurt so much. While other people is just like, you know what? I'm just gonna keep being me, keep being selfish, and forget about what, you know, it's that other person problem, not my fault that I'm carrying and I'm selfish. Okay. So selfishness definitely can be something that is kind of in your personality, just like being selfless can be in your personality. They have a scarcity mindset. People either have an attitude of abundance, believing that there is enough money and success to go around, or a scarcity mindset, thinking they must scratch and claw to survive and thrive. One of the biggest reasons people tend to be selfish is that they believe that there is not enough room at the table for everyone to eat. Oh my gosh. When I tell you the crabs in the barrel mentality is so real, it is so real. Some people, they just want to hog all, and they think that, like, if they share the spotlight or if they share ideas or things of that nature, that then the attention and the shine not going to be on them, which is very selfish, by the way. But we see it all the time, particularly in the Black community. Let's just be real. All right. One of the reasons why we don't unite and work together, it's contextual. All right. Right now, the election is going on. We'll come together for a little bit. Still not how we need to politically, though. But we'll come together. Then once the election's over, we'll go back and be disorganized again. It just kind of is what it is. But the crab in the barrel mentality is so real. With that thought process, no wonder that they are always fighting for their position to hold on to possessions and power to make sure they are not left out. They think selfishness is weak. Some people consider givers weak. They believe that if they cater to the needs of others, they will be seen as a grunt or a brown noser. That way of thinking causes them to show their power and strength by bulldozing everyone around them. That's a new tack. I never really heard that before, but I can see why some people would think selfishness is weak. 6, they are insecure and scared of not belonging. Either we talked about emotional earlier, we talked about emotional intelligence, and part of it is feeling secure about who you are. Selfish people are generally insecure about who they truly are or whether or not they belong. Their greatest fear is that their faults and flaws will be uncovered and that they will be exposed for the failure that they are. So they become control freaks, doing anything and everything that they can do to protect their fragile representation. I agree somewhat, right? I do think that some control freaks, they try to control things because they just literally want all the power, or they want to make sure that, yes, they always seem competent, right? But I think what they're talking about here is a very small percentage of our population, right? Just like a narcissist is only like 10% of our population, even though when the women break up, they call every man a narcissist. It's kind of crazy, but so I think this is a small percentage of our population. Number 7, they have abandonment issues. Again, going back to childhood, selfish people have an intense fear of being abandoned. Not only do they hang on tight to belongings and authority, they hoard friends and family members to keep around them in order to feel important. A selfish person would rather exclude you for fear that others will love you more than them, then welcome you into the inner circle with open arms. I guess I could see how abandonment issues would be a problem with a selfish person. 8, they gravitate toward useful people. Many people who are selfish have a sense of entitlement and only care about people who they see as valuable. They believe they have a God-given right to be surrounded by those who are seen as important and influential. If you happen to be a person they see as unimportant, you can rest assured that they would treat you unfavorably and take you for granted. Once again, I can see how a selfish person would want to be with useful people. So when you're in the company, you are the company you keep, as they say, right? So being around enough useful people could definitely be a benefit. Number 9, they mistake selfishness for self-love. Self-love is a necessary attribute that everyone should have to ensure they have balance, wellness, and peace in their lives. People who are selfish truly believe that they are just protecting their peace and filling their cup before they can pour into others. The problem is that their cup is overflowing and they are unwilling to share. If you are truly practicing self-love and self-care, it is done in anticipation of keeping your mind, body, and soul in a healthy state so you can be a resource to other people. And last but not least, they are conditioned by the culture or environment. Now, might be the most true out of all 10, to be honest with you. A cultural environment of selfishness is the catalyst for turning everyone who is forced to live under those conditions into people who only care about themselves. If your community, workplace, or home is rife with toxicity and dysfunction, sooner or later you assimilate and become just like everyone else. An unhealthy environment can turn a good person into a selfish person who is willing to get ahead by any means necessary. And I totally agree. Like, I don't think we talk about how much like a learned environment socialization is. We talk about programming, right? We talk about just being in the in crowd, right? Because a lot of what we do is based off of a behavior that we see somebody else exhibit, right? It goes back to the saying there's nothing new under the sun. So everything has already been done. So a lot of time we just remix it, we regurgitating things, and we most of us are followers, right? Very little of us are innovative and bringing something new to the table, right? So we're selfish a lot of times because we're taught that way, right? Now, are some of us? Well, I don't even want to say is some of us naturally selfish. I mean, I think some of us have the proclivity to be more so on the natural side, but I think most of it is just learned behavior. Let's get into our second piece of evidence. All right, so my second piece of evidence is kind of similar to my first piece. While my first piece of evidence deal with a list of the 10 reasons why people may be selfish, this next piece of evidence is actually on a more scientific basis of why people are selfish. Not that the last one wasn't based on research or scientific research. This one focusing in more so on the science than the last article did. So let's get into it. This is from a platform called Big Think. A little familiar with it. I don't believe that I used it, the platform on this channel. So something new. So the title of it is Why is Everyone So Selfish? Science Explains. Okay. So let's get into it because ain't nothing to it but to do it. All right. Let's see. Why do so many people seem so selfish these days, putting their needs first? The coronavirus has not only decimated our population and played lives on anxious hold, it has also been a test of character, a test that by and large we appear to be failing. People are at each other's throats over wearing masks, the true facts of the pandemic, blatant racism, old monuments, all the while appearing to be driven by pure selfishness to others, a feeling coming from all sides of the political spectrum. Where does this selfish behavior come from? Exacerbated by a series of crises. For starters, it is to some extent natural to be self oriented. After all, what else do we know? We're at the center of our own worlds, always looking to bolster the ego. Self interest is the most fundamental human motivation, argued English philosopher Thomas Hobbes all the way back in the 1600s. But acting out of self interest is not necessarily the only thing on our minds. As research has shown, human behavior can be motivated as much by altruism and moral considerations. So, at what point does healthy self care and the right amount of self love become selfishness, a trait we judge negatively? Now, I will say that I battle with that myself because I'm like, okay, I'm naturally a giving person and I naturally sacrifice my needs and my wants for other people, particularly my kids, right? I work with children, right? I've worked with children as young as 5 all the way up to, of course, 18. I've worked with adults, right? So when you're working with people, there's a fine line you definitely got to have for, okay, how do I protect myself? And a lot of times it's just emotionally, right? In some cases, physically, like, and think about myself and not put all my eggs in one basket and totally think about what's best for them. So it's a slippery. So it's something that I think we all have to deal with and something that we all have to keep in mind and be conscious of, to the fact that we got to protect ourselves while also protecting other people, right? Psychologists like F. Diane Barth define selfishness as having two primary pillars: being concerned excessively or exclusively with oneself, and having no regard for the needs or feelings of others. Of course, most of us probably live somewhere on a sliding scale of selfishness selfless to selfish moments. I agree. Still, in the public consciousness, being selfish is erroneously associated with becoming more successful, even though the facts don't necessarily better it. I have heard that before, that the most successful people are the most selfish people. Now, how true that is, who knows? A 2020 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology looked to figure out if people who prioritize self-oriented behavior did better in life. The team, led by Kimo Erickson of Stockholm University, compared such factors as the yearly income and number of biological children. They analyzed a large sample of responses by 5,294 Americans to the Public Opinion General Social Survey between 2002 and 2014, as well as European responses to the European Social Survey. The scientists identified the more selfish people by their answers to various survey questions. Overall, while the researchers found that in public perception, 68% of the people believed selfishness was a common trait of those who made more money. In reality, people with selfless attitudes and behavior had higher incomes, also more children. Generosity pays, as states the title of their study. Here, Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize winning economics, speaks about the virtues of selfishness. What's more altruistic behavior may be the default opinion in our brains, suggests research carried out in 2016-2017 by a team led by Leonardo Christoph Moore from UCLA. They found an area of the prefrontal cortex that can be specifically affected to make people less giving. That's pretty interesting. That part of the brain is what you can consider the selfless gene. So if let me go back up. So if selflessness is rooted in the brain, why do some people have such a hard time caring about the needs of others? The answers might lie in emotional intelligence. They were using that. Emotional intelligence is one of the most abused words. Like, what's a couple other words? I lost out the top of my head. Watch, I'll think about it. Anyway, uh, the answer might lie in emotional intelligence, as pointed out Lisa Marie Bobby in an interview. Emotional intelligence exists on the spectrum, and some individuals are higher in emotional intelligence than others, she shared. One symptom of low emotional intelligence is a tendency to be self-absorbed or exclusively concerned about what you're thinking, feeling, needing, and wanting, instead of thoughts, feeling, needs, and desires of others. Like the article said, and I agree, that's a slippery slope and it's case dependent, right? Another unfortunate factor, many find it hard to detect selfishness in themselves. As a 2020 study from Yale psychologists and economists at the University of Zurich found out, selfish people make adaptations to their memories to avoid feeling bad about their egotistical behavior. The research published on April 29th in the Journal of Nature Communication revealed that people tend to remember themselves being better to others than they actually were. When people behave in ways that fall short of their personal standards, one way they maintain their moral self-image is by their ethical lapses, explained Molly Crockett, assistant professor of psychology at Yale University and the study's senior author. Fast forward a few years from now, and certainly more than a few people will be remembering their actions of today with a very different slant from what actually happened. As it is, getting better grasp on the behavior that doesn't take others into consideration, everyone's personal responsibility. Where does one right end, let's say the liberty not to wear a mask, and the right of everyone else to good health begin? At what point does your right not to get affected outweigh the right of another to pursue economic prosperity? How much does my right to survive depend on the goodwill and cooperation from others? Answering these truthfully without feeling attacked can stem the tide of real and perceived selfishness that goes against our better nature and costs us lives and societal degradation. And I'm going to stop here. I think it is. Nope. That's the end of it anyway. So I think what we have to understand is whether there's a part of our prefrontal cortex that deal with selflessness or not, right? We all have to kind of weigh the scales of, okay, when do I think about myself and when do I think about the other person? Because sometimes they're not like, it's not egalitarian, right? So they don't equal each other out. They're not on the same plan. It could be apple and oranges, so to speak, right? So we have to think about ourselves a lot of time, particularly, like I said, it's case dependent, right? The context matter. So whether or not it's ingrained in us, instilled in us, we learn it, it's part of our brain, we still have to, it's like patience, right? We have to work on our patience every single day because some things set us off and some things don't. right? There's little things, small things like being in traffic, even though I know people lose their mind in traffic, but that's small compared to, or like waiting in line at a grocery store is smaller to being a patient waiting for medical care, right? So it's always case dependent, right? So being selfish or being selfless is definitely based on environment, it's based on temperament and other factors, right, that we can put in play. All right. So let's move to our last piece of evidence, which is kind of my counter argument to wrap this thing on up. All right. All right. And our final piece of evidence, evidence number 3, of why I believe that most people operate out of selfishness is, well, let's say this piece of evidence is kind of like I said earlier, it's kind of like the counter argument because this article, which is from a platform called The Conversation, which I have used before, and they do have great conversation pieces as articles on this platform. And let's just get into it. And the title of the article is Humans Aren't Inherently Selfish. We're actually hardwired to work together. Okay. So this is kind of the kind of argument. Let's see what they're saying to kind of argue the fact that the previous 2 articles, which is arguing for people being selfish, this one is saying that no, people are not inherently selfish, which actually goes to my argument that they are learned to be selfish, right? Socialized to be. So that's still pretty much my case. All right. Let's get into it though. There has long been a general assumption that human beings are essentially selfish. We're apparently ruthless with strong impulses to compete against each other for resources to accumulate power and possessions. Now, that part is very much true. I don't see how, I mean, society bears that out. So I don't see what will be the argument against that. If we are kind to one another, it's usually because we have ulterior motives. If we are good, it's only because we have managed to control and to transcend our innate selfishness and brutality. I will say, when we look at religiously, right? Well, why do you think so many people do believe? A lot of them believe just in case. So it's almost selfish because a lot of people behave because they're not sure whether or not a heaven, a hell, or a God exists. Just something to think about. This bleak view of human nature is closely associated with the science writer Richard Dawkins, whose book The Selfish Gene became popular because it fitted so well with and helped to justify the competitive and individualistic ethos of late 20th century societies. Like many other, Dawkins justified his view with reference to the field of evolutionary psychology. Evolutionary psychology theorizes that present-day human traits developed in prehistoric times during what is termed the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness. This is usually seen as a period of intense competition where life was a kind of Roman gladiatorial battle in which only the traits that gave people a survival advantage were selected and all others fell by the wayside. And because people survived or depended on access to resources, think rivers, forests, and animals, there was bound to be competition and conflict between rival groups, which led to the development of traits like racism or warfare. Well, I would say racism kind of led to the of trying to hoard resources for one particular race. Okay. I think that's where that kind of grew out of. This seems logical, but in fact, the assumption it's based on that prehistoric life was a desperate struggle for survival is false. Prehistoric abundance. It is important to remember that in the prehistoric era, the world was very sparsely populated. That's true. So it's likely that there was an abundance of resources for hunting and gathering groups. According to some estimates, around 15,000 years ago, the population of Europe was only 29,000. The population of the whole world was less than 500,000. With such small population density, it seems unlikely that prehistoric hunter-gatherer groups had to compete against each other or had any need to develop ruthlessness and competitiveness or to go to war. Indeed, many anthropologists now agree that war is a late development in human history, arising with the first agricultural settlements. I agree with that. That all of that is historically factual. Contemporary evidence. There is also significant evidence from contemporary hunter-gatherer groups who live in the same way as prehistoric humans. One of the striking things about such groups is their egalitarianism. As the anthropologist Bruce Kunoff has remarked, hunter-gatherers are characterized by extreme political and sexual egalitarianism. Individuals in such groups don't accumulate their own property and possessions. They have a moral obligation to share everything. They also have methods of preserving man, that's such a hard word to pronounce. Egalitarianism by ensuring that status differences don't arise. Now, but I will say this though, as we start seeing with the agricultural revolution, and then we started seeing kind of be nomads and things of that nature, they started kind of breaking out that group solidarity and kind of the whole bringing back food to feed the whole group, right? Once we started spreading out and populating the world, things changed. So, but he does have a point. The Congo, South Africa, for example, swap arrows before going hunting. And when the animal is killed, the credit does not go to the person who fired the arrow, but to the person who the arrow belongs to. And if a person becomes too domineering or arrogant, the other members of the group ostracize them. Typically, in such groups, men had no authority over women. Women usually choose their own marriage partner to decide what work they want to do and work whenever they choose to. And if a marriage breaks down, they have custody rights over their children. Meaning anthropologists agree that such egalitarian societies were normal to a few thousand years ago when population growth led to the development of farming and a settled lifestyle. Altruism and egalitarianism. See, I just be trying to say it too fast. All right. In view of the above, there seems little reason to assume that traits such as racism, warfare, and male domination should have been selected by evolution, as they would have been of little benefit to us. Individuals who behave selfishly and ruthlessly would be less likely to survive since they would have been ostracized from the groups. I agree with that too. It makes more sense then to see traits such as cooperation, egalitarianism, altruism, and peacefulness as natural to human beings. These were the traits that have been prevalent in human life for tens of thousands of years. So presumably these traits are still strong enough now. Now, I would say that cooperation amongst the group, the social setting, the doing what the Romans do, so to speak, right? Those are definitely traits that we evolved into because that's how we was going to be successful in order to survive, right? So they make some strong points, I would have to say, all right? Of course, you might argue that if this is case, why do present-day humans often behave selfishly and ruthless? Why are negative traits so normal in many cultures? Perhaps, though, these traits should be seen as a result of environmental and psychological factors. Research has shown repeatedly that when the natural habitats of primates are disrupted, they tend to become more violent in hierarchy. So it could well be that the same thing has happened to us since we gave up the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. In my book, The Fall, I suggest that the end of the hunter-gatherer lifestyle and the event of farming was connected to a psychological change that occurred in some groups of people. There was a new sense of individuality and separateness, which led new selfishness and ultimately to hierarchical societies, patriarchy, and warfare. At any rate, these negative traits appear to have developed so recently that it doesn't seem feasible to explain them in adaptive evolutionary terms, meaning that the good side of our nature is much more deep-rooted than the evil side. And to be honest with you, most of that I actually agree with. That, and once again, that's social though. So my point that a lot of selfishness is learned, right? So what we did was we grew out of the hunter-gatherer lifestyle and led to more. The industrial revolution changed everything, right? So our modern times that we see now has led to our selfishness because now we can be selfish. It goes back to the whole idea of we can be single, right? Before we wouldn't even dream trying to live alone because the context and how things were would not be conducive to being single. But now we've socialized the world so much so that people could say we don't need men and women. We want to be single. We'd rather live with our animals, right? So all this goes back to even previous videos that I've done before. So they make a great point, but I think my case is the fact that most people are raised to be selfish or they learn it due to trauma or something like that. All right. All right, let's get into my conclusions. All right. I mean, to be honest with you, I think a lot of kind of what I was saying based on the evidence provided is I still feel good about most people operate out of selfishness. I do think that's based on how they grew up, their environment, It can also be based on their goals and what they feel like their purpose is, right? I know it sounds a little weird, but not saying that their purpose is to be selfish, right? But if your purpose is to be some kind of business tycoon, there's a lot of decisions that you're going to have to make that are going to be in your best interest, right? You might have to step on a few toes in order to get where you want to get, depending on how successful you want to be. Like I mentioned earlier, some people say the most successful people are the most selfish people. I think it's, once again, it's always case dependent. So you don't have to be selfish to be successful, right? I'm actually one of the most selfless people that's out there, and I'm successful. So it's a lot of times depending on perspective. It really is, man. It depends on how you live your life. You know, if you're a religious person, you want to be Christ-like, or if you want to be, follow the ways of Allah or wherever who you believe in, then that can help not drive you to be selfish. But what we see a lot of time now is most people are tertiary believers anyway, right? So, and for those of you who don't know who tertiary or what tertiary means that basically you kind of just follow to get along, right? You're doing it, like I mentioned earlier, you're doing it just in case there happens to be a heaven and hell or God, right? So yes, I even the last article that I read to you that made the case that no, people aren't inherently selfless. Actually, most people are selfless. It's just that because how our society has, evolved, right? Going past the hunter and gathering stage, getting more into the industrial revolution, things of that nature. That so we've actually learned to be selfish, which once again goes to my point that we're socialized. All right. So that's the episode for today, man. I thought it was a great episode. Number 15. We getting close to the end of season 1. I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart for rocking with me. We got more and more great videos to come. For those of you that haven't subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. I see people watching the video. Please make sure you like the video. I see you watching. Subscribe to the channel, man. We're going to have more and more things to come. I promise you. All right. But I can't make that happen until you subscribing. You giving me more, I give you more. That's how it works. All right. Hey, go pick up the books. The link's gonna be in the description. Y'all know I got the merch, so other things are gonna be popping. So hey, I got you. All right. So as always, you are me, love always, love eternal. Remember, the worst thing you can do is lie to yourself. And I think I made that case, baby. All right. Deuces.